Saeidi. She's a former prosecutor who used to work in New York City. And Mahsa, so you've been reading parts of this complaint. Effectively, first of all, is there anything about the bill that I didn't lay out that you think is important? And then second of all, what's the nature of this complaint?
Okay, so first I'll start with this group that's located in St. Petersburg. It's a nonprofit that seeks to combat racial injustice, and what they do is that people who have lost loved ones to police brutality, they try and help those families. So this complaint was filed in the Middle District of Florida. It's a 23-page complaint. I read it, and Evan, you have a great understanding of what this law does. Now, I want to be clear. Right now, there are already laws on the books that ban public disorder, that ban looting, that ban rioting, that ban destroying property. What this quote-unquote anti-riot bill does, it toughens those penalties. So it makes some misdemeanors into felonies. It creates some new classes of felonies. It creates much more serious repercussions. If you're arrested, you can't be released on bail until you go before a judge. So just makes everything much more severe. And as you said, it bans, it prevents local jurisdictions from decreasing police budgets by allowing county commissioners, city commissioners to appeal to the state, and then the state can prevent them from moving around the funding in the way that they see best. Specifically, if you take down a monument, including a Confederate monument, that is now a second-degree felony. If you're convicted, you could face up to 15 years in prison. Let's say that you feel threatened and you see protesters, and if you drive into the crowd, what this law does, as you mentioned, is it makes it easier for you to escape civil liability. So there's a lot that we can unpack here, and as you said, it does define a riot. I have that information in front of me.
But that's one. Let's do that, Mahsa, because I actually wanted to ask you a question about that, and I was looking for the exact.
I have it.
Okay, so let's talk about how it defines what a riot is now in Florida law.
Okay, so under Florida law, a riot is now a violent disturbance involving 3 or more people, so just 3 people, and they have to be acting with a common intent, and then it has to result in injury to anybody, any person. It has to, or it could result in damage to property. And this I thought was really interesting, Evan, or imminent danger of injury or damage to property. So even if no one is hurt, even if property is not damaged, if you got close to that, then you can be in trouble. And what this group is saying is basically this is stopping people from exercising their First Amendment rights by, you could, for example, let me play out the situation. You could be at a peaceful protest and then it turns violent, and even if property is not destroyed, now you're facing some serious penalties.
Right.
And they're also saying that this is kind of very vague, and it allows police to arbitrarily enforce it.
Well, let me ask you a question, because I think your background here is very useful. One of the big things that Florida Democrats brought up on the House floor debate over this bill was who makes these decisions. So the way you read the law, who decides whether or not it's a riot?
So obviously the people making the arrest on scene. So you could have a demonstration happening, a peaceful demonstration. Again, it is your First Amendment right as an American. If you do not like what's happening, the relationship between police and the community, you have a right to go out into the street. You have a right to protest. This is your rights under our Constitution.
Right.
And so police officer could be at the scene. And we should also mention, Evan, what happens if you block a highway, because that's big as well.
Yeah, that is important, and that is part of this bill. And you mentioned, this is part of the First Amendment. You're right. The right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. The part that I want to ask you about is the law is written so that effectively a police officer on the scene could decide whether or not this is a riot, and an aggravated riot, which effectively is just a larger version of this riot, or a more deadly or a more dangerous version. But where I want to ask you, the subjectivity of the phrase imminent danger seems like a very slippery slope. So that officer is deciding that because there are people who are protesting, he may think that there is imminent danger, but someone else may be in that protest on, let's say, another side of the crowd or a few blocks away if it's a large group, and it's completely peaceful and doesn't look like that at all.
Yeah, and that's exactly why this group filed this lawsuit. They say that it's unconstitutionally vague for all the reasons that you just mentioned. We know obviously police officers have to make decisions in a split second, so then it would be up to them to decide whether what they're viewing right now is about to turn into a riot, if property is about to be destroyed. And I do think it's important, you know, many people love this law here in Florida. The governor said we are a law and order state, and this law does have support, but it's also incredibly controversial, particularly because, Evan, although we saw much more violence and looting in other cities across the country, here in Florida, in those 11 months after the horrific murder of George Floyd, we didn't really see that as much here. There was some incidents in Miami, in Jacksonville. We had here in Tampa a sports goods store that went up in flames. But there's a question of whether, you know, this is even necessary here in Florida. And as I mentioned right at the top, there are already laws in place to prevent you from looting, from rioting. And this group says what this does is it makes it basically too risky to go out there and to exercise your constitutional rights. Like, you don't want to be sitting in jail for 24 hours. You don't want to be in the part of the peaceful protest, and then some people acting crazy somewhere else, and then now you're facing a felony. So that's what this group is claiming.
That's what opponents of the bill have said from the start, is that it chills your ability to peacefully protest because you're concerned about these larger issues. We've got some great comments from viewers, and we want you guys to weigh in on our poll. So let's go to JB Biunno.
Yeah, we updated the poll ticker there, as you see there in the bottom right-hand portion of your screen. We want to give everybody an additional moment here to be able to vote, because we do have a lot of votes coming in. We are moments away, really 50 or so seconds away, I believe, from we're about to get over that 1,000 vote threshold that we like to get over here on Battleground Florida. But, you know, Mahsa, Evan, was noting here that this has been a popular bill, a popular law so far here in the state of Florida as far as the response that we've seen on social media. And our live audience here on Battleground Florida seems to agree. Let's get to some of the comments that are coming in here. Aubrey here, #HeyJB. And again, if you want to have your comment featured here on screen, use any of the hashtags that we have here on your screen on Battleground Florida. Aubrey saying, #HeyJB, peaceful protesting is completely within anyone's right, but violence does not solve anything and only leaves more victims behind in the destruction. That's the comment here from Aubrey. Let's get to Dina here. For you, Evan, #HeyEvan, anyone destroys another's property or hurts another in a riot should be held liable. I 100% agree with this decision. All those businesses destroyed and looted, some spent in their life savings to open their businesses. No excuses is the comment here from Dina. Dina, thanks a lot for your comment. And again,
I totally agree. And all of that was already against the law.
Last one here, Jane Salisbury, #AJB, keep us Floridians safe. I agree 100 with DeSantis' law. Keep these violent protesters out. And as you see there, the timer just expired here. Let's get to our poll results here. And we did. We're actually really starting to get a whole lot of votes now here on our Facebook Live interactive poll here on Battleground Florida. An unscientific poll here based on social media responses, but very, very interesting when we look here at what our audience has to say in real time. Do you support Florida's new anti-riot law? 79% say yes, 21% saying no, and I think a lot of the comments that we've seen so far reflect that, Evan and Mahsa. A lot of comments here in favor of the new law signed into effect by Governor Ron DeSantis.
Yeah, and then want to point out, sorry, Mahsa, before we go right back to you, I want to point out the provisions of the law as they were signed went into effect immediately upon the governor's signature. So that happened on Monday afternoon or Monday morning. And so they became law right away. That obviously could have been very impactful were there to be a different decision coming out of that Chauvin trial than we ended up seeing. Obviously, thankfully, justice was served there, and people were relatively calm across the nation and across the world after that trial ended. But he still has not yet been sentenced. We'll see what happens there. Not to mention, we have seen 2 high-profile police killings of black people in the past week. Obviously, no circumstance is the same. They're all unique and they all have their own challenges. But obviously, from a social impact, that's the type of thing that could be impacted by this law, Mahsa.
And really quickly, just before we hear from Mahsa, I just want to for the sake of balance, I want to get to one comment that we had just come in here a moment ago from Ariel here to, again, show that there is a split here in our Facebook Live comment section. Ariel, #KJB, this creates thought police and is a slippery slope to
Totalitarianism.
Thank you.
Yep.
I'm reading
Tough one.
a lot of comments very, very quickly. Apologies, all. I am afraid of the intent of this bill.
Yeah,
is what Ariel is saying here.
A lot of people supporting that point of view too. I mean, it's good to hear from both sides there.
Yeah.
Mahsa, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you know, regarding the first two comments, I forget the name of the people that you said, but you know, again, we just want to stress that it is already illegal to set fire to a building. It is already illegal to incite violence. It is already illegal to harm people. And what the fear is of this now new law is that it's going to stop people from being out on the street to protest what they think is wrong in the first place, that they're not going to go out on the street, because if it does turn violent, you know, if part of the group turns violent, then you're suddenly facing a felony, and then you're suddenly sitting in jail for 24 hours, and then, you know, you're opening yourself up to civil liability. And outside of that, there's a lot of criticism for the portion of this bill that allows the state to kind of control what local police budgets are doing as well, Evan.
Yeah, I think, in fact, I think that's one of the larger controversies about this bill, because you know, Republicans, in fact, typically are in favor of home rule, you know, putting as much power and dollars as possible into local the smaller the government, basically, the better. That the closer you get the government to the actual people whom it serves, the better off you tend to be. That's why local governments make better decisions on behalf of their constituents than the state does, and then that the national and the federal government does. That's generally the overriding principle, but not in play here, because obviously the state and the administration commission gets to make decisions that could override what local officials decide about their own budgets. And so that could be a big problem as we move forward, and could be one of the parts of the bill that gets challenged in court.
And I know that, Evan, you typically, you know, cover the politics side of this, but as the governor was here in Polk County signing this bill that he calls, you know, the most pro-police piece of legislation in the country, as that was happening here in Polk County, you had closing arguments in Minneapolis and the Derek Chauvin trial. So I don't think we can, you know, the administration is definitely seizing on the moment to make a statement here of what Florida is and what Florida represents, and just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, absolutely. But very important. And in fact, I think the part of the bill, there's so many measures in the bill, folks. We haven't even gone over all of them. 61 pages long. Makes a number of changes to administrative and criminal law in the state of Florida, but one of the big ones there is also increasing penalties for injuries to law enforcement officers, particularly committed during what we call a riot or an aggravated riot. JB?
Yeah, we've been looking for your comments here, folks, in the Facebook Live comment section, as we do here on Battleground Florida, our weekly episode here airing live at this moment on WFLA.com, the WFLA app. Let's get another comment in here. Kara, #KJB, are constructional, or I think that...
Constitutional.
I think that it's spelled constructional, but I think she means constitutional.
Could have been Siri at work.
Perhaps. Might be Siri. Yeah, a lot of us like speech to text. Our constitutional rights, we'll say constitutional for the sake of the comment, don't allow us to cause destruction, harm, and hate. Peaceful only. Use your rights properly is the comment here from Kara. Again, the results of our interactive poll, we're now coming up on 1,500 votes, 79% in favor, 21% not in favor. And I believe that that's going to do it for our social media comment 7.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Anything else that you want to add, JB or Mahsa, while we have you?
I mean, the only other thing I'll say is the governor, just to, you know, be completely fair here, he says that the bill prevents defunding police. He says the bill is going to hold local governments accountable for dereliction of duty. Basically, if they tell, I mean, this is a scenario that hasn't happened, but let's say the Polk County Sheriff's Office says, don't arrest anyone, stand down. And then if there's property damage or someone's hurt, then they can sue the Sheriff's Office.
That's right.
Penalties for people that shut down, swift penalties for shutting down highways, protecting monuments, liability for mob intimidation. If you loot, you will go to jail. So that is what, you know, the governor is saying. Again, a lot of this is already against the law, but this does up the ante.
Sure does.
And I'll just make this one last point here as well. Let's not forget the Governor DeSantis up for re-election next year. That's perhaps something we could spend an entire other episode of Battleground Florida talking about, but perhaps there's a wrinkle here as well, of course, regarding his reelection bid in 2022, Evan. That's going to be here before we know it.
It is. In fact, you could argue that we're already in campaign season if you're DeSantis. And so I think you're seeing a lot of his priorities, that one being top of the list. There's a reason why it's called HB1. Passing. That was sort of the biggest priority coming into this legislative session, which now only has a week or two left. So not a surprise there. And we are going to start to see more posturing, I would imagine.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing a lot of things being enacted now from the governor's office, you know, that basically signals that we are fully really into the 2022 election season, so to speak. I mean, we have bonuses coming in for teachers. We have bonuses coming in for first responders. And, of course, we're seeing a lot of Governor DeSantis. We had 2 press conferences just this morning here, one in the food bank in Palm Beach County, another environmental announcement for Earth Day. So we're starting to see a lot of activity from the governor's office here in the state of Florida.
And he doesn't even have an opponent yet.